Let's look at the Baroque in France. Please note that there's a more classical style, more rule-based, sort of descendants of the Carracci, if you will. The king establishes an Academy of Art, a Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture, and based on the ideas of this character, Poussin. Poussin was a painter born in France, not Paris, but who spent most of his life in Rome. Here we're seeing a self-portrait of him. He thinks of himself as an intellectual. He wrote a treatise on, here's his portrait, a treatise on optics, on painting, that conveys the craft of painting as an intellectual activity. In his painting here, which he's done for a friend, you can see that he's kind of lined up these paintings, frames that, back and front of paintings, kind of thinking about painting as an illusion, and conveying that in his portrait. And as well as, this is a portrait that he did for a friend who is absent, and so this image of friendship, a personification of friendship here in the background with the absent friend embracing her, is, again, just an intellectual exercise that he quite liked. Now in his painting, and I'm only going to show you two, our textbook talks about early and late Poussin. I'm only going to look at late. Here's a painting, The Judgment of Solomon from the Old Testament, where the king is being asked to judge which of these mothers is related to the live baby. There are two babies. One has died. Each mother is claiming the live baby, and what he suggests is that we should slice the baby in half and give half of the baby to each of the mother. And you can see the different reactions. The real mother is horrified. The fake mother is says, yeah, let's do it. Oh, baby's dead. Please note the interesting way he's composed this very logically, so that there's a group of, the volume of bodies over here equals the volume of bodies over there. Colorисtically, the yellow here, the yellow there, they seem to take up the same space, green, green, etc. We could do this ad nauseum, a very carefully rendered painting. Another painting is this one. It's from Greek literature, Achilles. The story is, again, this Greek hero, Achilles, his mother knew that he was going to be a Greek soldier and he would get killed by some weakness in his heel, the Achilles heel. And so she sends him off, before he can be recruited, sends him off to an island of women in drag. And but the Greek soldiers need him, and so they come looking for him and expose him by bringing a box full of jewels with some weapons in it to essentially out Achilles. And that's what's happening here in this slide. Again, this would be a little trickier to dissect the symmetry, the asymmetrical balance of this composition. But please, at this moment, note that Poussin also liked to do a lot of historical research for the setting of his paintings. Like these costumes are derived from Greek sculpture, etc. The weaponry is also found in Greek sculpture. So what happens is in the meantime, in France, Louis XIV becomes king at a very young age. He doesn't consolidate his power until he's a young teenager, and you can read about that, how he does that. He has to overcome the noble class and put them in their place. So in any event, we'll talk about this portrait a little bit later, but please note that he has control over all the arts, or he takes control over all the arts as part of his reign. And one of the ways he does that, again, is to establish this French Academy of Art. In Paris, Poussin had made a trip back to Paris in 1648 when the king is ruling, and in any event, his style becomes the example for most French artists after this. Charles Le Brun is this artist, this painter who takes control of the Academy. He writes, a book And his take, again, using Poussin as a model, is to figure out how to teach all painters how to convey certain emotions. And you can read about this in the textbook. So, you know, if a painter wanted to show a jealous character, this is how they do the brows and the mouth, hatred like that, rapture like this, etc. And in any event, we can see this in this painting by Lebrun. It's called The Family of Darius. Darius is a Persian general who's been killed by the Alexander the Great, the Greek forces. In any event, here's the family, mainly women in the lighter colors here, who are, you know, asking for the mercy of Alexander the Great, and the servants in the background as well. And you can see throughout the various reactions to Alexander the Great. It is complicated by the fact that the mother of Darius mistakes Alexander's general, this guy in red here, for Alexander, and so, you know, some people are reacting to this faux pas, and others are just reacting to, you know, Alexander the Great now being the new leader in town. So let's go back to Louis the 14th and his reign. And again, you can read about it in the textbook, and you might know about it from other classes. But one of the ways he takes control is to set up a shop in a suburb of Paris, in Versailles, where he turns a little villa into a palace, and he invites all the nobles to come out there. He establishes this like crazy routine of changing fashion and certain habits, like cultural habits like gambling and theater and that kind of stuff, that the nobles have to keep up with, and so they are occupied with things other than trying to get into his political way. So anyway, part of that fashion, this is just one portrait of Louis, where he's wearing high heels and the tights and the great hair, that wig. But anyway, let's talk a little bit more about the palace. So the palace is only this big, again, converted from a lodge, and here's the bunch of people who are responsible for it. The architects, two of them. The gardens, which are morphed over, you know, decades. Louis lived a long time. Here's the gardener, and of course Charles Lebrun, the painter. In the garden, please notice these square patches. They are parterres. The darker elements are water parterres, or basins of water. The rationale our textbook gives for, that should be lavish, the money that Louis expended on Versailles are these: to keep the nobles in check, to stimulate the economy, we'll deal with that in a second, and also to project this great image of affluence, even though France was at war most of the time. France did not colonize in the same way that Spain did, so they couldn't bring in like gold from the Americas. So they had to create their own and different economy. So back to the palace, and again, this is it in that little block there, and here it is. And again, it expanded over time, but this is the core, the body of the palace. Some terms here. Please note that this open space, this courtyard is called the Cour d'Honneur, the Court of Honor. It's where the chariots came up and dropped people off. Please note that in each of the side wings there would be a suite. One of was the suite for the king, and the other the suite for the queen. These rooms are arranged in enfilade. That is to say, please note all the doors line up so that if you're standing, you can just look down. The rooms are arranged in a row. The notion of privacy is not an 18th century notion, but there would be guards at each of these doors. So if the king is the king and the queen would usually situate their bodies at the end of this suite of rooms. The guards would allow people in, depending on your status in the court. You could be allowed to, proceed closer to the body of the king. At a certain point, though, Louis decides to move his bedroom to here, to the right at the center of the palace. And the reason is because he has these ceremonies. He associates himself with Apollo, the sun god, who associated with the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun. And in his bedroom, which is now a very public affair, there is a dressing ceremony, and then at night an undressing ceremony would happen in this room. Here is his canopy bed, decorated fashionably, at least one point with ostrich plumes, and a railing as that sort of last major sense of, allowing only certain people in here to hand him his socks or his pants certain times of, during the dressing ceremony or the undressing ceremony. Now, right behind, I'm going to do this again. So there's his bedroom, and right behind his bedroom is what we call the Hall of Mirrors. It is a ceremonial room, obviously. It has windows. This is a window wall you can't see. Maybe you can see it better in this slide. Windows that look out to the garden, but the other wall is lined with mirrors, hence the name. And just kind of imagine that sense of reflection, like infinite reflection, huge garden on one side, reflected in the mirrors on the other side, and you in between, you and the king in between, and everyone else at court. Please note the paintings on the ceiling. We're going to talk about one of those. And please note, you can see it better here, that again, Louis created a luxury manufacturing industry to create all the goods, including the mirrors. It's called the Gobelin Factory, and here we are looking at a tapestry of sort of workers at that factory. There he is in his other fashionable outfit, visiting this, again, kind of like the Academy of Art that did great arts, fine arts, the minor luxury arts like tables and silver platters and all were created in the Gobelin's factory. And all these goods went to decorate Versailles, and then, of course, the noble palaces back in France. They had to keep up with fashion. One of the paintings on the ceiling by Le Brun is this one. There he is, Louis XIV governing alone. He took great pride in the fact that unlike his neighboring powers, Spain and England and whatnot, he governed without a prime minister. Instead, he took advice from all of these personifications, Olympian gods and goddesses, according to the image anyway, and other personifications. So, for example, here's Mars, the god of war, Mercury, the god of messengers, and there's a few others here. Let me get a detail. There's Hercules and Saturn, Neptune, etc., Minerva. These are all gods and goddesses, as well as, go back to that slide. Victory here with this prosperity. She's got the cornucopia. And France, who is this lady in the blue garment with the fleur-de-lis, the lily design on it. Please note that in the foreground at Louis' feet are all these little putti, P-U-T-T-I, these cupids that are playing cards, playing games, playing music. These are the entertainments that would be that Louis demanded from the nobles at the court. Lastly, just let's look at the garden. I want to show you three garden sculptures. Again, parterres of land and water parterres. In the back here, this is the back facade of Versailles, a basin of water surrounded by river gods. The gardens needed water. Louis created aqueducts. He controlled the waters, the river gods, to create his gardens. Again, Louis associates himself with Apollo. So here we have Latona, the mother of Apollo, and his twin sister Diana. They are seen here in a fountain where they're being ridiculed, according to this poem, ridiculed by, by townspeople. Their revenge is that Latona asks the gods to turn them into frogs. So some people think this is a reference to La Fronde, again, that event where Louis defeats his enemies to rule France. Another fountain is the Fountain of Apollo, and here you can see him moving towards the palace, and here another slide where he rises, in his chariot to to ride through the skies, and another little sculpture group in the garden of Apollo being dressed by the nymphs.